President Joe Biden described my next guest as a bull in a china shop for his muscular approach to foreign affairs. Former US Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, is a hawk on Iran, a strong supporter of Israel, and a highly influential voice in Republican circles. And these days, he's an outspoken critic of his old boss, Donald Trump. So, sticking with the theme of today's programme, that it's a dangerous world, what can Western leaders do about it? I asked John Bolton, what are the chances of a second Trump White House, and what would that mean for global security? Ambassador Bolton, we're heading for the next stage of the Republican primaries, the vote in New Hampshire this week. It looks as though Mr. Trump will be the Republican nominee. Can he beat Joe Biden?
Well, he can, and it looks like Biden will be the Democratic nominee, and he can beat Trump. I think this election will be much like 2020 and 2016, in that there will be a large group of voters, in this year, the largest of the three, a large group of voters who don't like either candidate. And in the end, the winner will be the candidate who is less disliked by this large group of voters. Not an ideal way to pick a president, but I think people are very unhappy. We're headed toward a rematch of 2020, notwithstanding all that dissatisfaction. It looks like what will happen, and right now that makes November impossible to predict.
OK, but if you were a betting man, are we likely to see another Trump presidency?
Well, I think it's entirely possible. I mean, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but Biden is deeply unpopular. Now, he's had some good economic news in the past few days. Consumer confidence is up in the past 2 months by record amounts. But people honestly don't think he's got the competence to make it through another 4-year term. And I think that situation, sadly for Joe Biden, but in reality is not going to get any better as days go by.
I'm going to come back to this because you're, I think it's still a member of the Republican Party. And it's quite interesting to hear you say that it's a pessimistic outlook that Biden can't win. But let me just come on to your particular area of interest and expertise. Foreign affairs looks set to play a bigger role in this year's elections than it might normally do, particularly the conflict in the Middle East. This weekend, the Israeli Prime Minister said that, in effect, Israel would never accept a Palestinian state on its borders. On the other hand, Mr. Biden says that the solution must guarantee a Palestinian state. What do you think a Trump administration would do?
I think it would be chaotic and unpredictable. I do think it's important that national security play a larger role in this election. It's been a mistake since the collapse of the Soviet Union in America that we haven't debated enough what's happening, and I think we're beginning to see the consequences of that increase. I think a lot of Americans would support Netanyahu's position on the two-state solution, but regardless of how popular it is, the reality on the ground is the two-state solution is dead. Something has to be done for the Palestinians. They've been abused. They've made into a weapon against Israel for 75 years now. That hasn't gotten anywhere. But the idea that you're going to reconstruct Gaza and build a state on that, I think defies reality. The Palestinians were weaponized by radical Arab leaders back in the 50s and 60s because they were still trying to drive Israel into the sea. That is not going to happen. They are not going to return to their quote-unquote country of origin, Israel, especially after October the 7th. So for the good of the Palestinian people, whether they're in Gaza, the West Bank, or wherever they may be, for their own good, for the good of their children, they need to be resettled into viable economies.
Well, in that situation, and you've talked about this in the past, there is, of course, one big actor that might stand in the way of any of that, and that is Iran. Is the United States making a mistake, do you think, that in attacking the proxies for Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, even Hamas in some ways, or should it strike directly at Tehran?
Well, I think we're seeing right now, with respect to the Houthis, for example, 5 or perhaps it's now 6 American strikes. They're still firing missiles and drones at ships in the Red Sea. Iran is not feeling any pain for what's happening here. And what is happening is not a series of discrete, isolated clashes. This is the implementation of what the Iranian leadership calls the Ring of Fire strategy against Israel, developed by the late unlamented Qasem Soleimani of the Quds Force. Hamas didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, why don't we attack Israel? This was coordinated. This is part of an Iranian plan. We can't discern the full picture of what the Iranians have in mind, and they might not be very happy the way it's playing out. But Iran didn't arm and equip and train and finance the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Shia militia groups in Iraq to use these resources for their own benefit at their own discretion. Iran did all that so it would have a capability through its proxies to act as it's acting now.
So would you...
Notwithstanding strikes against these proxies, Iran is still at it.
So would you still stand by what you've said at times in the past, that actually the United States should simply just take action against Iran?
Absolutely, and I think we could do it. I think we could send several Iranian ships that are in the Red Sea aiding the Houthis. We could send them to the bottom of the Red Sea. We could attack air defense sites inside Iran. We could go after military headquarters of the Quds Force. We could go after camps where weapons and training have been transferred to various militia groups. Our attacks wouldn't necessarily threaten the mullahs in Tehran, but as long as they are engaged in all this activity in the region, cost-free to them, they will continue to do it. We have no deterrence now in the region, not even, for goodness sakes, against the Houthis.
Let's talk about the relationship between the UK and the United States. When you were National Security Advisor back in 2019, you said that you welcomed Brexit and the United States would quickly negotiate a series of trade deals with the UK to make Brexit work. When Mr. Trump left office 18 months later, those talks hadn't even begun. Well, what actually happened?
Well, I would put the blame, unfortunately, on the government and the political parties in Great Britain. The Remainers lost the vote. And they simply didn't accept it. And they fought for years, making it almost impossible for successive governments to deal effectively in the trade area with the United States and others. If you ask for a vote and you lose and you don't like it and you try and subvert it, sounds a little Trumpian to me.
Well, the reason I'm asking this is I'm wondering how you're assessing the relationship between the UK and the United States. Pentagon sources last week criticised our Defence Secretary for an interview he did here, actually on Sky News, in which they say that Mr. Shapps let slip that there would be an attack on the Houthis. In Washington, certain in the Ambassador Bolton mind, can the UK be trusted as an ally?
Yeah, look, you'd have to be really living on a different planet not to see that pressure was growing to strike the Houthis. And the circumstances, I think, were increasingly clear. The problem with both governments is we didn't strike the Houthis earlier. And I think, and I have certainly welcomed the position of successive British governments in providing aid to Ukraine, far more vigorous in advocating and proportionally supplying aid to Ukraine than the Biden administration has been. Quickly,
the issue, I guess, is whether in Washington we are thought not just willing but capable. One of our former military leaders, Lord Dannatt, has been saying this weekend that we're running down, particularly the British Army. Do Americans think that we are not just a willing but a capable ally?
Yeah, look, I think both the United States and the United Kingdom are going to have to spend substantially more on defense. Right now, U.S. level's about 3% of GDP. U.K. is a little bit over 2%. I think the U.S. needs to go back to Ronald Reagan-era levels, given the threats we see around the world. That's 5 to 6% of GDP. honestly, you should do the same. God knows our friends in Europe have to go from their relatively low levels, almost all of them, to much higher levels. We all made a mistake when the Cold War ended. People said history had ended too, and that it's the economy stupid and nothing else matters. Look at the invasion of Ukraine. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. Look at the Chinese threat to the South China Sea and to Taiwan. History didn't end. Threats exist. Global politics is still dangerous, and if we're not prepared for it, we will find ourselves in a disadvantageous position. A strong welfare state, a strong national health system will not defend you against your adversaries.
Very quick last question. Probably you only need one word for this. If there is a Trump administration, if asked, will you return to serve at the White House?
I will not be asked, and I will not serve.
We'll see. Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for your time.
Glad to be with you.
Well, with me now and listening to that interview is Yalda Hakim, presenter of our new global affairs programme, The World, launching on Sky tomorrow. First, Yalda, many congratulations on the new show. John Bolton, what's your reaction to what he had to say, particularly on Iran?
Well, first of all, just in response to his last answer there about whether he'd serve again if there was a Trump 2.0, it didn't end well, so I can't imagine that he would serve again. But look, you know, I think what we're going to see over the next year, and certainly something that we're going to address on my show, there is going to be a lot of catastrophizing of the world. The end of democracy, the end of the world order as we know it, the end of American leadership. And I think what I hope to do on the programme is to help our audiences understand that we live in an incredibly polarised world where there is a lot of distrust, but actually also have thoughtful conversation and you know, discuss the idea that there are different views and it's okay to disagree without being disagreeable. So, you know, in terms of what's going on in Iran, I mean, we can see the Middle East embroiled in this escalating conflict. And, you know, I guess I always sort of say what happens in the Middle East doesn't necessarily stay in the Middle East. The United States has often said, look, we've moved on from the Middle East. We've moved on from the war on terror. And now our focus is great power competition. Our focus is China. Our focus is dealing with the problem that is Russia. But somehow they always get dragged back into the Middle East. So I imagine we're going to, on the show, try and make sense of that.
Well, I shall certainly be watching. Do you think that... I must say, I do like the idea that we inject a little bit of nuance. And as you say, the catastrophizing that goes on, I think, slightly ill-serves audiences in many ways. But in a sense, do you think that this is a real big moment for foreign affairs, isn't it, and journalism? We normally think foreign affairs, oh, well, nobody's that bothered. But I think it's having a big impact on the electorate. You
know, I mean, for me, foreign affairs has always been my bread and butter and my true love. And so I guess I've always had my eye on what's going on globally. But you're right. No longer are people, certainly in this country, feeling like something is going on over there and it doesn't impact me over here. I often say, you know, people may not quite know how to pronounce Prigozhin or exactly what was going on in Russia or Ukraine. But actually, they know what happens over there impacts them here, and they need to know. And so that's what I'm hoping that I'll be able to give through the show to our audiences.